You are listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my regular weekly guests, and we are all here to share the research, the science, and the strategies, as well as some of the fun, to help you to create a more active life. Hello and welcome to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my special guest this week, Katie Knapton, who is a physiotherapist who has a special interest in a certain part of our anatomy. So tell us a little bit more, Katie.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, so I'm Katie. I'm a physio. I've been a physio for about 30 years. My special interest is actually women's health and incontinence, but I work predominantly in musculoskeletal. So that's your normal aches, pains, backs, necks, and all of that. But surprisingly, a lot of women are presenting with other issues on top of these, and they are all relevant. So incontinence is my thing of the moment.
It is something that seems to be almost accepted as a condition, and it's something that people, I think, almost gloss over or don't talk about or don't quite understand. So what is incontinence?
So incontinence is any involuntary loss of wind, so a fart, or a pee. So it's or poo, if we're going the whole caboodle. So it is any amount. So and the problem, you're absolutely right. People say, oh yeah, no, I'm fine. Because most people associate incontinence with a total loss of urine. So someone is having to wear a nappy and they can't move without having a problem. And that isn't true. So any loss that is involuntary, that you haven't chosen to do because you're not necessarily in the right place, is classed as incontinence. So there is no such thing as an acceptable sneeze wee or anything like that, which you see in some of the adverts. It is not normal to leak, and there is no need for it.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because like you say with the adverts, they just be oops moments and things, and it's almost normalizing it when actually it is something that I think is quite common. So how common is?
Well, it's estimated at least 1 in 3 women, particularly. And yeah, I think that's quite scary in itself. It's probably more because we know that to get diagnosed with actual incontinence, it can take up to 7 years. And those are the people who are actually seeking help. So those are the people who are significantly compromised by it. So if we're talking about the ones that I just come across, or, someone just says, oh, whoops, that just, never mind. Those people aren't even being put into those numbers. So we're talking huge numbers. And you're right. It's, if you're thinking it's fine and normal to reach for the pads, it isn't. They have a place, don't get me wrong, but just because they put lace on it doesn't make it acceptable.
No, it's amazing, isn't it? How pretty they're becoming and normalizing them. Do you think a lot of people just think of it as part of getting older, or?
Yes. I think it's just seen as a normal part of aging, or the fact that you've had children, which we know will increase your likelihood of actually having incontinence because of the strain that it puts through the pelvic floor, and potentially you might have had trauma. So we sort of want to get in early. So we want women following having their babies or checking that they get their pelvic floor assessed and that they know that they've got control. And if you've done really well and you've had your children had no issues, don't think that it might not hit you when you hit to the perimenopause or the menopause days. So we know that as we get a little bit weaker, as we get older and we get a drop in that estrogen, you are more likely to have a weakening of your pelvic floor, which can lead to some issues. And although that sounds really depressing, I think the positive thing is that actually we can do stuff to help it. And as you know, they're muscles after all, and we know that muscles can be strengthened. So I think it isn't doom and gloom, but we really need to shout at people. The sooner they deal with it, the quicker they'll get results when they actually engage in the right exercises.
And that's so important, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about the pelvic floor as a muscle. It is a muscle, and we all know if you use it or lose it. And it's the same with the pelvic floor. Just very, very briefly then, we're talking about the pelvic floor. We know where it is, what it is and everything. Just a brief little anatomical, for anyone who isn't sure about their pelvic floor, where can they find it?
If we have our pelvis, so this is this pelvis is facing you, and these are your pelvic bones, and you've got your hips.
So they're the bony bits you can feel when you're standing up or lying down.
Yeah, so up here.
Just in case people... Yeah, people might not see the video, so
okay, sorry.
Just those bony bits at the front. No, do it because it will be.
And then where you sit under there, So underneath, so where you have your anus and coming up to your vagina, all those words that lots of people don't seem to know what they are, and your pubic bone, that is where your pelvic floor sits. So some people talking about it being like a sling underneath. And it's slightly more complicated than that because it's also made up with some really complicated connective tissue. But it's, so we could talk about it, a really complex spider's web that is muscles and connective tissue that helps support your internal organs and also help, when they're activated, help close those sphincters of your anus and your urethra. Sorry.
And that's, simply, as I say, there's quite a lot of literature out there, but I think a lot of people just think of it as being those muscles down there.
Yeah, I can give you a really nice link that we can provide for people that shows a 3D anatomy done by the Australian Incontinence Society, who have some great stuff.
Lovely. We'll pop that in the notes for anyone who really wants to see that, because it is actually an important muscle to know about and understand. So again, we're talking about incontinence quite generically. Are there different kinds of incontinence that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, there is. There's two main ones. So the first one is your stress incontinence, which is probably your most typical, and that is that weakness. So that is that cough or sneeze, that something just starts leaking out and you're just losing control. You're not able to stop yourself weeing. And then your second one is your urge incontinence. Some people call it sort of latchkey incontinence. So that's when you just put your key in the door and you just have to rush the loo, and sometimes you're too late and that becomes a problem. And you can also get that. So I get a lot of people presenting when they go for walks and they suddenly can't actually hold in their wee when they're walking. So they have to go and find a tree and things like that. And so those are your most two common types. And then there is a mixture of both. And then you can have overflowing continence. And that really requires some medical assessments because that can be a reason. And we also can have hyperactive bladders, which is another complication. So it can be an interesting mix.
So it's, there's quite a lot to think about, isn't there? But for me, I think I've worked with people who, certainly in classes and things, and they say, I can't do that because I'll wet myself. So is it a barrier to people becoming more active? Because what I want to really promote with this podcast is everyday activity. And how much of a barrier can having a weak pelvic floor or having even early onset incontinence be for people?
Oh, hugely. It makes you feel hugely uncomfortable to go to the gym if you think you're going to wet yourself. So, unless you're aware of how to control it, and potentially in those early stages, doing exercises that won't put so much pressure that it's going to be a problem, will definitely put you off going. And we know that it's socially isolating and it can really affect people's lives, lead to depression and all sorts of mental health problems. So we're in a society that we need to promote activity and health and well-being. It's a huge problem, and a lot of people aren't happy to discuss why they're not going to the gym or why they're not exercising.
It's definitely something we need to be talking about more, and certainly within the fitness and activity fields, it's something I put it into all my classes regardless. There's always, at the end of it, people know bit of relaxation, bit of pelvic floor. They know it's going to happen. And people have said to me, just doing some simple exercises has really helped. But we need it to be much more awareness, but also make it accessible for people to actually be asking these questions. Is this normal? What can I do about it? Because I think sometimes people they don't know who to ask and when to ask.
Yes, that just ties in with that delay, doesn't it, of diagnosis, that people have got so bad by the time they actually go and seek any sort of medical advice on it. And you're absolutely right, it needs to be commonplace. And we need to know which exercises potentially might be a bit much. And that, so that you'll give people 2 levels, but send them away with some homework or having a look or seeing what's going on. So we know things that increase intra-abdominal pressure are putting more load on their pelvic floor. And someone with a slightly weakened or a problem with their pelvic floor, actually that might not be right for them to do at that time. And, getting them to do jumping jacks is probably inappropriate.
For many reasons. Yeah. But it's, and again, when we were talking just before we started, you were saying that you kind of see people almost before it's a problem or at the very, very early stages. Is it really important that people are aware that just the odd oops moment actually is the start of an issue.
Yeah, so as I said, I'm not a women's health physiotherapist, but I have a real interest in it and getting in earlier before people need really more complicated or involved treatment. So I will talk to someone who has just got back pain, and I'm amazed at how many people eventually I managed to find out that, oh yeah, no, I don't have any problems with my bladder at all. Oh, well, I suppose sometimes when I laugh, and you're like, no, if you're a lady in your 50s, you need to laugh. So, we need to sort that out. Yeah. And it makes sense the earlier you get it. So if it's just occasionally, don't think, oh, that's fine, because it's going to get worse. So unless you address it, it's going to get worse. And if you get onto it quicker, it's going to improve quicker. But it's also something that you need to just carry on with. So working with someone like you, Sarah, is fantastic because you're bringing it into their training, and that makes a real difference.
Yes, for me, it is a muscle. If I'm working the rest of the body, my whole thing is whole body approach. That pelvic floor's in there, but it's something that a lot of people are uncomfortable discussing, which is where it's so important that when you are teaching people, you use appropriate language, and that language might differ, mightn't it? If you're working with men or with younger women, it might be very different to the language you use when you're working with older women. And I think that's something that as instructors or as health professionals, we need to be aware that there isn't a kind of like one script fits all. We have to adapt to the population in front of us.
Well, absolutely. Although I'm a bit pro educating people about their anatomy and what things are actually called, because people do have some strange descriptions of things.
I've had some belters. You probably have as well. Yeah, we won't go into
those, but testicles to your spectacles is quite good for men.
Yes. I use an analogy of walking. I say, you're stark naked. It's New Year's Day, and you're walking into a freezing cold sea. Yeah. And as the water gets closer and closer to your crown jewels, everything starts to lift up inside. And a lot of men get that, and a lot of women are comfortable with that sort of language. But yeah, it's making sure that you're not vague. I think you're not being vague about what it is. Tighten the muscles up down there.
Yeah, no, and I hate that. The down there is really irritating.
I know. It's like, don't wear. I had somebody once say, tighten the muscles between your legs. And people were just so confused. Yeah. It was just like, I've got quite a few there.
And interestingly, we have changed how we used to approach it. So it used to be to test them, used to be advised to stop mid-wee, and we never advise that anymore. So what we tend to find is that we get more effective contraction by actually getting people just trying to hold in a fart. And then just working round and up. So you're really lifting. And then we also get, if people really don't get it, we get them facilitating by either sitting on a rolled up towel or a corner of, so when you were little, or you still see it with primary school children, don't you? When they're desperate for the wee, they put their hands between their legs. And actually that's because they are giving themselves some tactile pressure points that they can pull away from. So it does work. So with urge incontinence and training, if people are desperate and they think they're going to go and have to have a wee round a tree, but they know they had a wee before they went out for that walk, I get them to, that's what they do until they get control again. So it's really interesting. Yeah. Sorry.
So what are some of the simple exercises that people could do to start with when they first notice a little bit of, oh, hang on a minute, that's not normal? What are the sort of simple things that they can do to...
Well, I mean, this is the joy of if you've got mild stress incontinence, we know that probably up to 80% or maybe more can get better just from the simple exercises. You don't need to get more complicated than that. And that is your key gels that everyone sort of goes, oh, yes, I know that. And those are your slow lifts and holds for a count of 10, and then your quick flicks of 10. And you do 3 sets of those. Of each of those. So you're doing the endurance for when you're putting something through its paces a little bit, but you need those quick flicks for when you do that cough or you sneeze or that instant need for control.
And how would you teach that to somebody who had never done it before?
So we sometimes has to be, if someone really doesn't get it, so initially it would be just that, can you hold in a fart? Can you tighten up and hold? And can you breathe normally? Because what we find is sometimes that people are getting that wrong breath pattern, which can actually increase. Yeah. So people start bearing down, and that's a problem because it's not a bearing down, it's a lift. So I'd also get people to try with rolling up that towel and give themselves something to pull up against. So they're lifting away from the towel. Sometimes we do get people to either use a tampon or use their fingers and to feel that lifty squeeze and check that they're not pushing down. And again, it's checking in between each exercise, whether it's the slow or the fast one, that they totally relax in between, because we can have problems with people being a little bit overactive in their pelvic floor, which leads to problems in itself. Yeah. And those tend to, you sort of can recognize those people. I'm tightening all the time. I don't understand it. It's, I don't know why it's a problem. And that's because they're not using them correctly, and you need to be able to relax them too, because because we'll probably go into things to avoid. Yeah.
Yes, we will. But one of the things I was always told was, whether it's the fast or the slow contraction or lift, the relaxation phase needs
just
to be slow,
as important
rather than
to check that you can totally relax in between. Yeah.
So when people say then that, I've done all of those, but they don't work, what's your response to that?
So that would be then going through, right, okay, so if you feel in a lift, what are you doing? Can you breathe normally? We might go through some diaphragmatic breathing, because they might not quite have got that, and it's all part and parcel, isn't it? So, your diaphragm, your pelvic floor, your abs and your back muscles and your glutes are all part of your core. So if things are not activating properly together, then that might be the problem. And quite often it's that they're just not doing it right, or they're just not taking the time to relax in between, and they just haven't quite got it, or they haven't done it long enough. So it can take quite a long time. The advantage of doing it earlier rather than later is that a lot of people will say that they notice a difference within 3 or 4 weeks. But if you've had a longer, chronic, more tricky problem, it can take, 12 weeks onwards. So, you've got to be in there long term. You've got to be really determined. But I'd say if someone really thinks that they're doing everything as right as they possibly can, and they're still having problems, then they probably do need to be seen by a specialist and be assessed to see how their pelvic floor is functioning.
But it's like anything, isn't it, to do with any muscle strengthening is get the basics right. The basics, for a lot of people, will actually give good results. I think sometimes people go into more advanced techniques too soon, but it's really having that basic technique, just that lift. I'll always say, imagine you're in a cathedral at your best friend's wedding, and it's got to that, speak now or forever hold your peace, and there's that silence, and you suddenly realise that you've got a big fart to come out, and it's what muscles do you use to hold that in, and that often helps people to locate them. But I find sometimes people just aren't doing them.
And they're so simple. You don't need any special equipment. The other thing I have is lots of people want to buy special things. And there is lots out there in the market now, and they're really quite expensive. So I sort of think if you're not prepared to, when you're in the car and you stop at traffic lights, have a little go at lifting, are you really going to go up to your bedroom and shove something up there and try and do that regularly? I don't think so. So I really try and encourage people to really work on setting a timetable, fitting it into your normal day. You don't need any equipment. You don't need to go to the gym to do it. You can be in your car. You can be sitting. You can be cleaning your teeth. You can do it in any position. I mean, if you're really weak, we would start you in lying. But in general, you want to be able to do it in any position as you progress. So it's just that reminder. So you put the kettle on, you do some lifts. So trying to intersperse it normally is probably going to be your most successful way.
And ideally, we other episodes of the podcast, we talk about behavior change and habits. It's that habit stacking. Plan to do it when you're doing something else, because then it's that nudge, that reminder, or even set a reminder on your phone or an alarm.
Well, then there's the Squeezy app that we sometimes encourage, which is really good, got some good information and is a good reminder. And what we need to be a little bit careful about is that we all get a bit sort of immune to these nudges. Because, I know I get one moment before watching, it's like, oh, God. So it's just trying to stick to it, because these are something that you need to invest in. So even if you think, I'd say to any woman over 45, they should be doing their pelvic floor, whether they think they've got any problems or not. And we need to continue in them throughout our lives. So because we don't need to become incontinent. It's not, that is it, tick the box, that's going to happen.
It's like you say, it's a lifelong commitment, like any muscle strengthening. If you stop doing them, it's not a question of I've got a strong pelvic floor, job done, no more incontinence, I can stop doing them now. It's a continuous thing, isn't it? It's a life commitment.
Well, yeah, because as you know, unfortunately, once we're over 35, we're getting weaker, whatever. So that's even if we're maintaining our normal sort of exercise level. So
yes,
although that sounds really depressing, you take it as a challenge and actually engage it and make the effort. And if you make the effort, it pays off, because personally, I don't want to wear a nappy. So I think you've got to, at some point, take a responsibility to look after yourself.
And it is, I mean, I've gone out with older relatives and things, and whenever we go out, the first thing they're checking is where the loos are and how quickly they can get there, and they almost position themselves. And I know others who are too nervous to go out, just in case.
So depressing. That's so depressing. And some of that will be a bit of mixture of the stress and the urge. So one of the instructions is that with the urge stuff, a lot of that's about bladder retraining. So there will probably be an element of weakness, but it's also about that. So you hear all the people, I'll go to the loo and do a wee now, just in case. That just in case problem is huge, because it actually then your bladder isn't working properly, because your bladder is trained to give you the direction that you need a wee when it's full. If you keep on weeing just in case, you develop an overactive bladder that gives you the signs more and more often. So that is why you need to work on that training and recognizing when the proper time is to take a wee. And then then people avoid drinking. And you should just drink a normal volume. Obviously, don't go mad, but ideally water. Just be careful with fizzy drinks, caffeine, alcohol, normal things. We'd say limit, because they can be irritable to the bladder. But it's just being sensible. And, you're normally going to probably need to pass urine at least 4 times a day and avoid having the just in case wheeze, because those then become a problem and feed in.
Now, see, I've heard that you should avoid the just in case wheeze. And I mean, let's face it, most of us in our childhood just
parents, we've always done it as parents. I mean, go on.
Give it a go, because otherwise, you get in the car and it's 3 minutes later and I need to go. But actually, no one's ever explained what happens, and so that's really useful to know that you're almost training yourself to go just in case, rather than to be able to hang on. So what are the things that we need to avoid then when we're talking about pelvic floor training?
So if you've got a compromised pelvic floor, so you're noticing some leakage when you're doing things, then you really need to bring the high impact exercise down. And I hate saying, you can't do. And I think it's not that we stop you, and it's not that you'll never be able to do it, but we need you, just like if you're starting any training program, you need to start from a baseline that you've got the right control. And then you can build up and get back to your running, whatever. But the amount of runners running with leaky pelvic floor is quite frightening, and you shouldn't do it. So you need to be aware that if you've got a problem, you need to be able to address it. You want to check that you can engage so you can control it a bit, and you need to build it up. Then there's the other things in terms of not so much the exercise side. There's things to avoid is constipation. Huge problem. A lot of people are constipated, but that straining and trying to go to the loo puts a lot of strain through the pelvic floor too. And that can really aggravate any sort of pelvic weakness and incontinence problems, and potentially bring on more of a prolapse problem, which also can occur with later on. So
what, somebody who's listening to this and thinking, oh, actually, I might have 1 or 2 problems, where's the best place they can go to for advice? If they want to find out more.
There's some great information out there. So the NHS obviously has some information on incontinence. There's the POGP website, which is the physiotherapists with their special interest in female incontinence, etc. And that talks about antenatal and postnatal, because it's all relevant. So that's a great website. And then we're always available. I do an online physiotherapy clinic with a special interest or special women's health service, where we can go through and get you started if you needed more specific one-to-one advice.
Lovely. And we'll put all the links for that in the notes. Is there anyone who should not do pelvic floor exercises?
So, I mean, this can be a bit controversial, because some people go, oh. So sometimes if you've got quite a lot of pelvic pain, pelvic floor exercises can make it worse. And again, those are the
Right.
people that I would direct to a pelvic health specialist. So go via your GP, and you can be referred to the NHS or privately, whatever is right for you. But in general, you're not going to do any harm. So I would get most people to certainly have a go and see if it makes a difference. Because actually, in the majority of people, if you're doing them right and you're trying enough, it will make a difference. And we know that. And the studies, as I've talked about, are in people who've got quite significant problems. So if we get to people earlier, it's going to get improvements so much quicker, and it'll be really rewarding.
And that's the thing, isn't it? This isn't a natural consequence of aging. I mean, it's become one because people do nothing about it, but actually you can change it, you can manage it, you can reverse it, and you don't have to put up with pads and oops moments.
No, absolutely. The one message I want everyone to know, it is not normal to leak at all.
No. So if people have got concerns, your recommendation is seek help.
Yeah, I mean, look up some information, have a chat with someone who knows, try some pelvic floor exercises yourself, and see where you're at, and get to it. The information's there, but if you need a little bit more, then seek some help, and certainly do not just sit in silence and not do anything about it.
Do you think that there are certain maybe population groups or age groups who are just embarrassed to actually admit it? What would be the advice to somebody who's just, I'm so embarrassed, I can't talk to anyone about it?
Yeah, well, I think there's lots of people like that. I mean, and that's why I think, hopefully things are improving. And I know a lot of people that the barrier is going in to be examined. They don't really want that. And that's why I've set up a video service that we just have a chat. We just have an idea. Yeah. So you sort of feel informed without the scary bit. Also, it's more convenient if you've got young children and things. So I think it's just recognising there are other ways to approach this. You don't have to go in and feel nervous about being examined straight away, because it isn't always necessary.
Excellent, lovely. So where can people find you if they want to find out more about what you offer?
Okay, so my company is called Physio Fast Online, physiofastonline.co.uk. So there's a website there. There's a special section about women's health, and then there's women's health appointments that you can just book online whenever they suit you.
Wonderful. We'll make sure people know where to find you. And thank you so much for coming on to talk about this, because it is something I feel it's so important, and it can be such a barrier and an issue for people, not just in general everyday life, but in becoming more active, which becoming more active is going to benefit so many other parts of the body. But if a weak pelvic floor is putting people off, then we need to address it. And just one thing I'd like to finish with is, contrary to popular belief, your pelvic floor is not attached to your eyebrow.
No. Oh, yes, we haven't really talked about it. Yes. So the other giveaway, if you're not doing them right, is if there's lots of movement and then there's lots of eyes going like that. So if you say, oh, yes, I'm doing my pelvic floor, that ain't right. There shouldn't be any visible signs that you're doing them. You should feel them deep up inside, but there should be no visible signs. There shouldn't be any glute contraction. You're doing it wrong. And the one other thing, I know we're wrapping up, but the one other thing is really good to relax your pelvic floor. So some really good positions are your deep squat, your giggling baby pose, and your child's pose. So those sort of things are really nice to relax. So if you think you've been doing a little bit or overdoing it, really good positions to really just let things relax and do some nice breathing. So some of those yoga poses are great.
Lovely. Yeah, they are, aren't they? So, so the only thing you should be lifting is your pelvic floor. If your eyebrows are lifting, then stop it.
Absolutely right.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie. That's been really, really useful. And we'll put all the details of where you can find out more information and where you can find Katie as well online. But thank you so much for doing this. And who knows, maybe we'll come back and talk about musculoskeletal issues at some point. Oh,
yes, we can get into strengthening in the over 45s. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my guests. Join me each week for more on how to create and sustain everyday activity, and follow me online at Fitness Career Mentor or Fabulous if you're interested in career development and more on creating active lifestyles.